Forgotten City, Chapter 13. More snatchers, said Kobe. Asha was breathing hard. No, something waste infected. She threw a glance back the way they'd come. It's getting close. Kobe heard a noise, a screeching, chittering sound growing by the second. He couldn't tell where it was coming from, but Asha's attention seemed fixed in one direction. And as she stared too, fear eating at his heart, he saw in the torchlight the floor was coming alive with a mass of furred flesh. Rats, some the size of small dogs, other perhaps a foot long. It was hard to make out their individual bodies as they clambered over one another in a seething torrent. Dozens of them. Asha fired a dart, but they kept coming. Run, said Kobe. Bumping into one another, stumbling over uneven ground, they turned and fled, but they'd gone just a few paces when Asha pulled them back. More, she said. And she was right. Another stream of rodents were closing from the other direction, surrounded. Kobe's skin crawled as he saw the full horror of the swarm. The waste hadn't only made these creatures bigger, it had malformed them too. Some were bald or covered in glistening sores. Others had two heads or hobbled lopsidedly on stunted legs. Others had overgrown teeth growing through their faces like miniature tusks. Fionn, do something, said Asha. The boy closed his eyes and thrust out both hands on either side like he was trying to hold back two invisible walls. Kobe felt a prickle through his body like he could pick up strange signals Fionn was sending out. And the rats did slow, as if momentarily stunned. But the effect was short-lived, and they scurried on in frantic waves. Over here, said Kobe, then took out the remains of the lighter fluid. He poured it on two linens on either side of them, 15 feet apart, and held the torch to the ground. Flames licked across the floor, but only a few inches high. He drew his machete, and Asha took the axe. Fionn snatched the taser. Now we know what took the survivors' remains. The rats reached the boundaries of the fire and paused, tumbling over one another. But almost at once, one of the leaders landed in the fire with a terrible squeal, rolling around in panic. The fire was extinguished in seconds. The remainder of the rats streamed over their dying kin. A scrawny, jagged-clawed thing threw itself at Kobe, who hacked it aside mid-air. He kicked another before a smaller one latched onto his jeans and began to claw its way up. A shriek came from behind Kobe as one rolled past with the taser prongs jutting from its neck. Kobe grabbed the rat from his waist and hurled it as hard as he could at the wall. It hit with a dull splat. Asha was spinning, trying to use the stock of the rifle to bash rats aside, but there were two fighting up her back unreachable. Kobe sent them tumbling with a prod of the torch. The creatures flooded around Kobe's ankles, and he felt the sharp sting of claws and teeth. He kicked and stamped as best he could, but for every rodent he killed or tossed clear, more swarmed after it. Asha tried to climb, using the ledge of the wall, but the rats simply piled over one another and jumped to reach her, and she fell back down into the melee. She swiped the axe over and over in wide arcs, driving them back. Kobe ignored the ones on his own body, wading through with the torch at ground level, kicking and stamping. Some caught a light and charged blindly, setting fire to more. The bitter smell of burnt rodent flesh was all around. Then, inside his head, he heard the jolt of a barked command. Look above you! Kobe looked up and saw a two-headed rat with a wizened hind leg scurrying directly above, along a roof beam. It dropped toward him, and Kobe gave an upward swipe. The machete blade cut the creature in two and covered him in goblets of blood and gore. Fionn, roared Asha. Kobe saw the boy had fallen to one knee and dropped the taser. A rat had sunk its teeth into his forearm, and though he shook it violently, the thing wasn't letting go. More were crawling up his legs and lower body. He shot a desperate look to Kobe. Kobe's scalp tingled in a burst of pins and needles. Though Fionn didn't say a word, the young boy's voice echoed inside Kobe's head like a tunnel. Help me! In the same moment, a powerful, strange kind of fear gripped Kobe's stomach. He realized somehow that it was not his own. He was feeling Fion's terror. He dropped the torch and tried to stagger across to help the young boy. Asha was coming from the other side. Dead and dying rats squelched and squirmed underfoot, and Kobe tripped, collapsing headlong into the morass. He felt rats covering him almost at once. He tried to stand, and through his panic, he saw Asha reach Fion's side and begin to rip off the marauding rodents. At the same time, she herself was swamped. We can't win, thought Kobe. They're going to eat us alive. A loud crash made him twist around. The skylight showered in shards of glass, and something massive tumbled into the tunnel from above. What now? The creature landed, shaking more debris from its fur, then raised its head in a growl. Kobe took a heartbeat to understand what he was seeing. The wolf from the school! It made no sense. It must have followed them for miles. The gray-furred predator set into the rats at once, crushing them beneath its paws and snatching them with its teeth, 2, 3 at a time. With vicious shakes of its head, it broke bones and tore at flesh. Kobe managed to stand and attacked with his machete again, slashing until his arm ached. It felt like he'd been fighting for hours, but it must have been only a minute or so before hundreds of dead rats were gathered at their feet and against the blood-splattered walls. The remainder turned and fled as quickly as they had swept in, and their chattering died away into the darkness. It took a second or two before Kobe could even think. Then he saw Asha was cradling Fion in her lap. She looked up through tear-filled eyes. He's really badly hurt, Kobe. Kobe struggled over, trying to ignore the pain across his body. The wolf shambled over too and lowered its enormous head to nuzzle at Fion. Despite their grave situation, Kobe couldn't help but wonder how the wolf had found them and why it had come to their aid. It must have followed Fion, and it realized he was in trouble. The boy was breathing shallowly, and his eyes were half open, the whites of worrying shade of yellow. A sheen of sweat covered his forehead. His hands and forearms were badly bitten, and there were patches of blood across his torso, too. But it didn't look like any arteries had been severed. He just looked desperately weak, like he could lose consciousness any minute. The rats have contaminated him with more waste, said Asha. He hasn't gotten long, thought Kobe, with a sudden awful clarity. He needs cleansers. Kobe hadn't been able to grab any before they left the school. We need to get him to the lab fast. Don't worry, Fee, he said. We'll get you out of here. His eyes met Asha's. How? She mouthed. Kobe looked around in desperation, then pointed at the hole in the roof where the wolf had burst through into the derelict street. The smoke from the fizzing torches was spilling out into the dawn of the city. The lab can't be far, but we have to get up into the city to see where we are. Kobe stood and went to the skylight. The street was about 12 feet up. Kobe's first attempt to make the jump fell well short. The wolf cocked his head, then padded over. It wants to help, said Asha. Kobe swallowed. Are you sure? The wolf pushed him out of the way, then lowered itself to the ground. Go ahead, get on, said Asha. Kobe shot her a wary glance. Easy for you to say. Taking a deep breath, he sank his hands into the thick fur and hoisted himself over the wolf's back. It lurched to its feet sharply, almost throwing him off. But Kobe was closer to the ceiling and managed to loop his hands over the lip, pulling himself up to the street level. Gusting sea air and a gray dawn greeted him. The skylight opened onto one of those streets a block back from the bay, under a tree coated flyover beside the old docks. The harbor wall had been overwhelmed in places, undetermined by the onslaught of virulent plant life. What remained leading to the water was a huge swamp of seaweed. The great wheel loomed a couple of blocks north. Dad said it had once been an amusement park ride, but now it listed to one side, coated with vines and the occasional tangle of a bird's nest in its old cars. Below, Asha was tying a rope around Fion's armpits. She pulled it tight, then tossed the other end up. Kobe caught it. Bracing his feet on either side of the skylight, he gritted his teeth and then hoisted Fion up. The injured boy groaned softly. Asha came next, leaving the wolf below. As she clambered into the open, she gazed around in astonishment at the wind-swept harbor, then began to unfasten the rope from Fion. Do you think the wolf can make it? Asked Kobe. He wasn't sure he even wanted it to. There was enough to think about already. The wolf growled, bunched its hind legs, and sprang upward. Its plate-sized front paws gripped the sidewalk, and for a moment its lower body scrambled before it heaved itself up beside them. Nice jump, said Asha, stroking its mane like Ruff. The wolf licked her hand with its thick slab of tongue. Kobe couldn't even imagine what his dad would have said. Asha stroked Fion's head. How far to the lab? She asked. Kobe took out the map from his back pocket. About 30 blocks, he said. The wolf lowered its head again toward Fion. It wants to carry him, said Asha. Kobe scooped up the boy and laid him carefully across the wolf's broad back. They set off towards the waterfront where the city's looming towers opened onto the expanse of gray blue. Asha kept a hand on Fion to keep him steady, and Kobe had held his crossbow ready just in case. When they reached the road that ran alongside the sea, they turned north. As they walked, Kobe kept his eyes peeled for any sign of movement. Occasionally, he saw a snatcher in the distance, but nothing came close. His head was throbbing dully. You were pretty awesome in that fight, said Asha. You too, said Kobe. Remind me to not make you and your axe angry. Asha chuckled. Kobe rubbed his temples. You okay? Asked Asha. Just tired, I guess, said Kobe. Asha was silent for a while, and for some reason Kobe sensed she was uncomfortable. He heard other sounds. The shushing and slap of water on the dock, the whistle of the wind. He looked out to the sea where white crests frilled the choppy waves. A giant ferry, like a small island, rested up against the other side of the bay, but really, from here, there was no sign of the waste or its effects. He could almost have been looking out from the city as it was before the virus hit. Kobe, Asha said slowly, your headaches. You said they started just after your dad left, right? He frowned at her. Yeah? What changed when he left? Why do you think you started having them then? He didn't know what she meant. Well, I was on my own. That was pretty different. Maybe stress? But did any of your routines change? To do with your health? Her eyes were wide and focused as if she was seeing something obvious that he wasn't. Kobe opened his mouth confused, then closed it again as a sick feeling rose in his stomach. She couldn't mean my vitamins. You think my vitamins stopped my picking up telepathic signals? An icy stab rushed up through his chest. They were vitamins. Why would my dad want to stop me from receiving anything telepathic? He didn't know waste could do that to people. His voice was raised. No, he shook his head. Asha just watched him. Think about it, Kobe, she said. He didn't want telepaths being able to track you. He didn't want us to find you. No, Kobe shouted at this time. You're saying that Dad knew about you, about the Guardians. It's just a coincidence that my headache started after he left, or maybe it was a side effect he didn't know about. Asha curled down her bottom lip and nodded. Yeah, maybe. Kobe said nothing. They continued on in uncomfortable silence. Well, we can ask him soon, said Kobe, forging ahead, cheeks feeling hot. No, she's wrong. My dad wouldn't lie to me. He would have wanted us to find other survivors, unless he knew the Guardians were dangerous. As they crossed each block, past the old cafes and restaurants and apartment buildings, the Space Needle occasionally appeared, piercing the sky. Snatchers docked and swarmed, more than he'd ever seen before, but as tiny as flies from the distance. He thought claws must have sent more in. What kind of resources did these people have? Who were they? Whoever they are, they won't stop looking for us, he thought. He checked the map, looking for the quickest route, and spotted a set of narrow alleys a couple of blocks over called Pike Place Market. They could cut right through. He remembered his dad talking about it. Before the waste came, it was a bustling place where you could buy fresh produce of all kinds, fruit and vegetables just off the tree or out of the ground, not in a can 10 years out of date. Kobe thought it sounded a bit weird, even though he'd read about such things and seen pictures. But his dad spoke about peeling an orange like it was the best thing in the universe. They turned inland. The sign for Pike Place, which read simply Public Market Center, had crashed down into the street, and they picked their way past its metal frame to the covered market itself. Old delivery trucks spilling pallets and crates had been left outside. The entrance was dark, with a few shafts of light where the roof had collapsed. The wolf sniffed as they approached. You sense anything? Kobe asked Asha. Hard to say, she replied. I can't tell if I'm picking up the wolf or something else. Still, they proceeded slowly. The inside of the market was like a dank cave. Anything fresh had rotted away a long time ago. Fionn muttered occasionally, not words exactly, but worried grunts and groans like he was having some sort of nightmare. Each time, Asha reached over and touched him softly. At one point, a helicopter definitely drew nearer, and they all stopped, holding their breath as its shadow passed overhead. Maybe the snatcher in the tunnel sent back some sort of signal, Asha said, sounding nervous. They might be on our trail. We can't afford any delays. Fionn, I've never seen him this bad before. Most of the clothes stores were swamped in vegetation, but in one, Kobe spotted some coats still wrapped in polythene and untouched by any plant growth. He pulled them out. Wear this, he said, handing a duffer jacket to Asha. They might help mask our heat signatures. He pulled one on himself and carefully draped the other over Fionn. Anything to give us an advantage. When we get in the open again, we'll need it. On the far side of the market, they paused at the doors. The university where the lab was located was still a dozen blocks east and 4 south, a route uphill. In the daylight, most of the bigger predators would be asleep, but if a snatcher or a claws chopper flew overhead, they'd be in trouble. Fionn's skin was almost pearly white, his breathing wheezy. Kobe felt for the boy's pulse. It was racing. They didn't have a choice. They had to press on. The first part of the journey took them between towering green skyscrapers. Most of the flora in the streets consisted of a wide leaf, giant ferns, and exotic flowers sprouting from the former shop fronts. But as they climbed higher still, the buildings shrank and the way ahead grew more forested and wild. The squat buildings on either side of the road were almost entirely coated like small green hillocks of only the flashes of steel or glass to show their true nature. It was so much farther than Kobe had ever come before. As they traveled, he counted off the blocks on his map. Near the university campus, the wolf stopped by a stream that babbled across the road. It dipped its head in to drink, then lifted its dripping muzzle. We're here, Kobe said, eyeing the complex of plant-covered buildings ahead. It didn't look at all promising, but his heart thundered. Can you sense Dad? He asked Asha. She paused and looked around, and then sighed and shook her head. No, that doesn't mean he's not here. There's a lot of interference, and if I haven't met someone, it's harder to recognize their electromagnetic brain signatures. That's what the Guardians told me. Let's split up. Call out if you find anything that looks like a lab. Kobe turned to the wolf. Fionn lay draped over its back, murmuring, his fingers clenched at the wolf's coarse fur like a baby instinctively gripping its parent. Kobe strode over to the wolf, who looked up from the stream, its muzzle wet, tongue lolling from its mouth. Kobe pressed his foot into the wet earth in front of the wolf. He crouched over the print, pointed at it, then jabbed a finger to its chest. Remember when you tracked me behind this tree stump? You found where I was hiding. He swept his finger over the building complex. I need you to find someone hiding now. The wolf's yellow-stained eyes glinted with intelligence as it gazed down at the print, then at the surroundings. With a growl, it brushed past Kobe down the overgrown street, nose dipped to the ground. Kobe grinned at Asha, but she was watching Fionn being carried away. Fionn will be safe with the wolf, Kobe said. Asha nodded. I know. She tapped her head. I'll keep track of them anyway. I'll come and find you if I discover anything. Kobe wanted to tell her to be careful, and go over his father's rules for traveling through built-up areas. But Asha was already treading carefully through what looked to have been a parking lot. Kobe turned in the other direction, hurrying down a slight incline to a wide, sunken courtyard surrounded by steps. It looked a bit like the jungle claimed ruins of the Aztec ziggurats that he'd seen in a book from the school library. The waste made everything, ancient and modern, look the same. He had no idea how big the university complex was or where the lab might be. Now that they were there, the doubts he'd kept at bay set in and multiplied. If his dad had made it there, why on earth would he have stayed until now? He'd spent so long thinking about reaching the university, he hadn't even stopped to consider how big the complex might be or where he'd even start. He thought if Dad was here, he'd somehow just know, as if they had an invisible connection or a telepathic link like Asha's. He was beginning to lose hope when he heard a far-off cry. Asha was calling to him. He sprinted in her direction and arrived just at the same time as Fionn and the wolf. "I've found something," she said. "Look." Under an archway, foliage had been cut away from a door, and there was engraved letters on a brass plaque beside the door. Grow Cycle Laboratories. The same company that sponsored the football stadium. The ones behind the outbreak. Kobe's dad said they were a biotech company, but perhaps they had done some of their research here too. "Think this could be it?" said Asha. It couldn't be a coincidence that the door was partially cleared. Someone had used it recently. "It has to be," said Kobe, trying to keep himself from getting carried away. He tried the door and it was unlocked. No sign of anyone inside, and it was filled with plant life. "Dad," he called, "it's me, Kobe." His shouts echoed through the deserted corridor. "We need to help Fionn," said Asha. "Where's the cleanser?" "I don't know," said Kobe. "Let's split up." They wandered across the mossy, spongy corridor, checking the doors on either side. It seemed to be offices and the occasional classroom, a small kitchen area. The wolf paused, sniffing as it set a vine-ensnared stairs. It swung its head toward them. "It's found a scent," said Asha. The wolf stood by Kobe and bent down so Kobe could lift Fionn over its back. Then the wolf began to climb the steps, nose lowered. Asha hurried after it, and Kobe, carrying Fionn, followed. When they reached the top, his heart flipped. The wolf was waiting by a door a few feet up, a door sealed from the outside with tape, which could only mean one thing. "That's it," he said. But at the same time, as he hurried toward the door, he felt a drag in his stomach as he realized what the tape on the outside meant. Whether he'd come and gone or never made it in the first place, his dad wasn't there. Asha shoved through, tearing the tape, and they rushed into a room filled with signs of his father. A lab coat hanging on a peg, masks and gloves, a notebook with a pen resting on it, vials and test tubes in racks. A board covered his dad's handwriting. And there, in the corner, a working fridge, no doubt powered by solar panels on the roof. Kobe laid Fionn on the table and went to it. Inside were several vials in a rack marked with a chemical formula in his dad's hand. Cleansers. They were dated, all within the last 2 months. He grabbed one of the antibody dosages and sterilized syringe pack. "Quickly," said Asha. "I think he stopped breathing. Fee, hang on." Kobe tore open the pack with his teeth and loaded the syringe. Fionn was completely limp. He looked like a corpse already. Kobe tapped his arm a couple of times hard to get a vein up. No reaction. Holding his breath, he plunged the syringe and eased the medicine into Fionn's arm. "Please, please," Asha mumbled. She clenched Fionn's hand, massaging the back. "Have you got any more? Give him more." Kobe wanted to tell her that if this dose didn't work, there was no point in injecting more. But he already suspecting it might be too late. "Wait," was all he could manage. The seconds ticked on, and Fionn just lay there like a doll. Asha began to cry quietly. Finally, the wolf lay down too, whining with its head on its paws, like it already knew.